How many isekais can a normal person read before losing their mind? That was the initial question that I asked myself at the beginning of our journey. It was going to be a simple read. Read 10 chapters, so about a volume and a half, to truly get a feel for the manga. So in total, 100 mangas, 10,000 chapters, which roughly translated to 20,000 pages. Nothing big. So to get this video out in a timely manner, I did the only reasonable thing. Like Icarus, I was full of hubris. I flew too close to the sun and thought you could retain your humanity after reading an inhuman amount of dog water isekai. I was being arrogant, a fool, a fate fan, okay, not that bad, but still, you get what I mean. Some of them were good, some of them were bad, and a couple were just boring. There was a few that made me question if there was truly a god. My nightmares will now have nightmares. Alright, ignore the video's length. I really am trying to keep this as short as possible. For the stuff that I like, I'll go into a little bit more detail, maybe leave something in the comment section, or maybe skip to the outro. And for the ones that I dislike, well, you'll know. Alright, not only did I read 100 isekais in 2 weeks, I took it a bit further. I made an extremely boring graph documenting every single type of method of appearing in another world. But that was only the beginning. I drove down to Staples, hit a grandma, just to buy a whiteboard, because why not? What will I do with it? Well, watch the video and find out. I've been God's fair mistake, and here's 100 isekais, the good, the bad, and the ugly. If looks could kill, this would be it. I've mentioned it before, but the main issue that I have with the isekai genre is that the protagonists have less personality than a cardboard copy of water. And the other one is they become overpowered or are given abilities that could rival God. And it makes everything feel so unimpactful. However, Evil Eye over here decides to keep the protagonist weak, only slightly getting stronger as he levels up. A high school boy is on the bus when he's told to get up. Not wanting any issues, he gets up and gives his seat, not knowing that in a few seconds the bus was gonna crash, leaving our protagonist to slowly bleed to death. But before dying, he sees the same dude that took his seat survive, but not only that, he was also recording him. With the only thing that our protagonist was able to do was just to stare at him. Well, he wakes up in another world inside of a mine and has to figure everything out on his own. Kinda. Eventually, he meets a demi-human girl that has a weird fascination with shovels, and together they form an adventurous party exploring the cave and defeating monsters. And right here's where it usually becomes boring. Mainly because the main character has some crazy overpowered ability, like he's able to drop meteorites at an enemy's head. But it doesn't go that way. He has to grind and find creative ways of beating his enemies as a regular Joe. Yet, all of that is icing on top of this isekai cake. The thing that makes this isekai so captivating without ruining an earlier plot development is the main character will get pushed to his limits both physically and mentally, where he's forced to take these actions and you slowly start thinking, is he going to become the villain? I have to know. Even when he awakens his overpowered ability, he still has to play smart and try forming plans because no matter how much he levels up, at the end of the day, he's still a human filled in a world that has monsters and criminals so strong that the government actively avoids starting problems with them. Alright, usually I say read a few chapters, but for this one, I am demanding, I read up to chapter 11 because, oh my god, it's so fucking cool. Hey Akiro, thank you again for letting me use your video. Check out their channel, they make great manga animations. What if the YouTuber, Primitive Technology, was also a badass karate master that unfortunately met his end when he pushed a child out of harm's way? Well, you get Karate Survivor in another world. Karate Survivor is about Nozaki getting hit by a truck and appearing in the middle of a harsh forest, with nothing aside from his karate skills and his brains. The cool part about this is that he has to build his own shelter, make his own clothes, and scavenge for food, and fight these alien-like creatures with nothing outside of his hands. Karate Survivor stands out in the sea of mediocrity mainly because of its world. The world is dark and gritty, like really dark. When he's not fist fighting monsters, he's fighting off assassins. Let me paint you a picture. The first few chapters we watch him elbow a hobgoblin, and the next thing we see is his blood and teeth falling off. That's kinda dark. When was the last time you saw someone punch anything and then had to go to a dentist? Also, it reminds you of Uncle from Another World in a way where it's able to dance the fine line between comedy and subversion that has saturated the market. Everything about this manga surprises me, to how there's not a single slave animal girl keeping him warm at nights just baffles me, but in a good way. Nozaki was summoned into the middle of a forest with nothing outside of his previous life's knowledge and his martial art trainings, and he was able to survive. And it's nice reading something that has a protagonist that's able to survive with his skills alone, and not by having an appraisal skill that also doubles up as a killer laser beam. He's a mature dude that makes rational decisions. Sometimes those decisions hurt the ones around him, and it's sad to see, but that's also what makes him a badass guy. Plus, he looks like Leonidas from 300. The fights are awesome, and unlike 92% of all isekai protagonists, the only thing that he has is punching things really hard, which is great. There's nothing more that I enjoy watching than him stomp a goblin's head. The world building is impeccable, it's league above the trash that you see later on, and I know the art and the character design look a little bit simple, but it's just one of those series where you could tell even with the limited art skills that the author might have had, he was still able to express his passion that he has for the series. You can see his love for martial arts expressed in the manga. 30 chapters in, it still hasn't let me down. It's a fun read, and a bit of a warning, I read it and the translation for the first chapter was pretty awful, no offense to whoever made it, but I just wanted to say don't get discouraged by the awful first chapter. It's a great series, give it at least 5 chapters. Speaking about people getting the teeth kicked in, here's another karate manga, and before this video gets too dark and edgy, let me brighten the mood. Karate Baka is a great story about a brave Japanese man fighting against the monster that kidnaps hundreds of life each year to another world. Our main character Shun, as the title implies, is a karate master. Someone so devoted to karate that he tries saving a girl by punching a running truck. Well, he ends up waking up in front of a goddess letting him know that he'll be brought to a parallel world. And hearing that he'll have to fight against some incredible monsters, he becomes excited. I will spoil one thing in this video, and that's that in the 100 mangas that I read, not once did a single person that was brought to another world reject the goddess's power, but was also excited to beat on some monsters barehandedly. So he ends up getting transported into the middle of an invasion, where the first enemy that he has to face is a minotaur. Now be honest with me, have you ever been inside of a building and thought to yourself, what would I do if the place got attacked? Or if a fire broke out? Where would you run to, or barricade in case something happens? Well, that's the same idea stretched over 4 volumes. Shun over here goes across the kingdom using karate to beat anything that moves. It starts believable. He fights a knight in full armor, so he uses his knowledge against him to win. And later he has to fight against a fire-breathing dragon, so he does the only logical thing and develops firebending, calling it karate. All because he wondered what he would do if he was fighting an airplane. So here's a cool thing about the story. On paper, the main character does not have any special skills or blessings, but he dented an iron shield, suplexed a dragon, and he punched fire spirits hotter than the sun. So he's as human as you and I and a crackhead. I don't know if making this statement would make me sound like a psychopath, but it's fun to watch him suplex a dragon. Karate Baka is such a fun and silly experience. If you want to watch a Street Fighter character in another world, give it a chance. It has a nice charm to it. The characters are fun to watch, the art's really good. I mean like really good, wink wink. I'll leave it as is, do more research on your own. Plus the artist clearly has a love for Asura because the main character resembles him so much. So yeah, it's a goofy manga. Give it 7 chapters, that's when he fights the dragon. Bad isekai is like eating McDonald's. It looks pretty on the outside, but once you eat it, you come to a sudden realization that you can't keep treating yourself like this. You need to love yourself and eat something better. Let me present to you the Wendy's of the isekai genre. No Longer Human in Another World is about a guy who was just about to jump into a river with his lover, but was unfortunately interrupted when a truck came in and stole the kill, sending him to a fantasy world in order to become the hero and save it. However, instead of feeling excited and ready to start a new chapter in his life, he laments that the happiest day was taken away by a truck. Then just as quickly as he arrived, he tried downing a whole bunch of sleeping pills before getting healed. What an unexpected and bizarre beginning to this story. To any story, in fact. And it only works because the main character is so bizarre. He's someone that clearly doesn't care and is not there to defeat the demon lord, he's just trying to find a place to die. And because of that, he ends up solving the issues in the most unpredictable ways. For example, he meets his future party member getting strangled by a monster that will suck the life out of its host. And instead of defeating it the conventional way, he accidentally beats it by letting it suck out the poison from him. And that goes for the entirety of the manga. He could try learning new skills in order to protect his party members, or he could just lie in a coffin while his party members are risking their life to protect them. And the longer you read, the more his cynically dark personality fits perfectly into that world. Especially if you read an isekai before, since the manga plays around with the tropes that the isekai is known for. Ironically, it's fun watching this depressed man who wants to end it all go on these adventures, because he doesn't behave like a typical shonen hero, or an isekai wet blanket. I definitely suggest you give this manga a chance, at least for the first chapter. The art is fantastic and the other world feels like an actual world that's slowly getting expanded. And the comedy, in my opinion, it's as good as Uncle from Another World. I don't want to toot my own horn, but I was right about that one. So if you enjoy that one, I would highly recommend that you give this one a chance.
Ryouridou Scenario.
I wasn't even gonna try pronouncing that name, but Ryu here is one of the most badass Yakuza members out there. Well, one day he stumbles upon a group of young thugs trying to make a name for themselves, and like any regular old person, he introduces himself by curb stomping the ringleader's nuts. Eventually a video of the whole interaction leaks, and well, he's given one of two choices. Either turn yourself into the cops or go into hiding. Well, right as he was about to turn himself in, his sworn brother comes in and convinces him to instead lay low, at least until he's able to fix the situation. So he gives him access to one of his warehouses. But right as he was about to hide, he was ambushed by the same punks who caused that earlier scene. And like every 2-bit villain, the boy starts revealing that his brother actually betrayed him and planned the whole thing, because he wanted to take control of his turf. And right here, alone, getting jumped by 5 other people, he did one final act of badassery, by dragging that punk from earlier off of a cliff and drowning his bitch ass. Well, as you can guess, he was given a second chance at life, hijacking the body of a young girl. Confused and angry, he begins to put the fear of God into the assassins that came after him there too. And all of that was neatly presented to us in the first chapter alone. Also, I haven't mentioned it, but the art, at best it looks incredible and at worst it looks amazing. I know when they announce an anime for this, I don't care if Bones, Mappa, and Trigger united to make an anime studio together, they wouldn't be able to replicate a fraction of the quality presented here. Which brings me to my next point. I don't know how to bring this up naturally, but they have a dark elf, and she might be the greatest addition to this manga. Also, I own the physical version, and the cover is fire. I don't know what's it called, but the characters are popping out of the screen, so yeah, there's that. What makes something a guilty pleasure? Is it the self-insert? The MILF? The way that the characters are drawn? It's a MILF. I'll stop the bit right there. The story's all over the place, but to be honest, you're not here for the story. You're here for the main character. He's an asshole, a lovable one, but an asshole nonetheless. The story begins with Saito, at the end of his journey trying to defeat the Demon Lord so he could go home. And as you can guess, he manages to defeat the Demon Lord and has everybody saying their tearful goodbyes and farewells. That is until one of his party members lets it slip that she was actually in love with the main character, and has been for a very long time, before another one of his party members reveals that she was also in love with him. But because he was already halfway through the gate, he wasn't able to answer their confession. You know, a bittersweet farewell to our main character. That was until this man broke through the gate as if he was looking for his little brother. Alphonse! You still a bitch! Saying he wanted to clap cheeks, except this time he was pushed back by his compatriots. Ending back in Japan naked and afraid, but before getting put on a list, he's saved by his childhood friend, now a MILF. Okay, I know I'm not making the manga seem all that interesting, the story is all over the place, the pacing is practically non-existent, but I still really do like it. The idea of using chess pieces as superpower is fun and creative. And the art, well, I mean, the art is... Everything about this manga is so weird that I just can't help but to enjoy this goofy little ride. I understand what makes a piece of media good, but verbalizing it can be quite a difficult task. Initially, I was planning on only reading the 10 chapters that I needed to write this review, but the more that I read, the more that I'm drawn to this world that they're trying to create. It wasn't the typical generic main character that comes to a new world and immediately defeats God. In fact, he's the weakest creature out there. Well, our protagonist is Tsurumi Asuta, a 17-year-old high schooler as well as dumbass. One day, a fire broke out at a restaurant managed by his father, and he does the only logical thing and runs into a fire to rescue his father's knife. If it wasn't taking itself so seriously, I would have laughed. Let me repeat myself. He ran into a fire to pick up his still living, breathing father's knife. It's not like they cost 300 yens. Well, he wakes up in the middle of a forest holding onto his father's knife, eventually getting rescued by Aifa, a refugee who's only considered a wild boar hunter. And slowly, you're dragged into this world, always curious at what's going on outside of the forest. Why haven't they tried breaking the forest laws? What makes them leave their homeland? Who draws this manga, and have they done spicier content before? I need to know. Yet, the tone of the manga is quite somber, weaving a story about how food mends bridges and even unifies those that aren't related. Tsurumi, a boy who's lost it all and is in an unfamiliar world, with his only companion Aifa, a girl who's the last remaining member of her clan, finding solace in Tsurumi, together viewing each other as family. I haven't done this in quite a while, but after I caught up to the latest chapter, I added this to my list on Mal, because I was not going to forget this one. Also, it's quite a shame that it has such a low score here on Mal. I feel like it doesn't represent the quality of the manga. If you like slow burn stories where the main character has no powers and has to use his limited supplies in order to grow and escape an unfair situation, then give this one a chance. It started off as an idiot dying in a ridiculous way and became a deep story about perseverance against discrimination and hope. Also, what the fuck, American writers? Copy this! How is a country filled with 99% Japanese people able to understand the subtle nuances of discrimination that people who are currently discriminated against? That makes no sense. Why? How do Japanese know how to be better black people? It's slow. Give it a few chapters, you won't be disappointed. You know, when I decided to make this video, I didn't think I would have to add another method of categorizing manga, but here it is. Extra bad. Stinky. Well, a Japanese high schooler ends up becoming dinner for a brown bear and ends up getting sent to a fantasy world, where he gains the magical weapon, a strap. The story doesn't seem to do anything new or exciting with this premise and the events that occur, such as the main character being nearly killed by wolves and being forced to marry an elf. It's not engaging or interesting. Also, the lowly goddess communicating with the main character through a radio, it adds nothing to a story outside from a bad joke here or there. Overall, it seems like the story lacks originality. It's not worth reading.
He didn't do anything wrong.
Because he's the hero Gotham deserves. But not the one it needs right now. So we'll hunt him.
He is the hero Isekai deserves, but not the one that he needs right now. A quote by Angel's Error. Yeah, this one's a weird one. It's Ryouridou of a healer if the main character actions have more dimension to it outside of revenge, and actually made you think, is he really the good guy? Isekai NTR is about a guy who was summoned to a fantasy world in order to defeat the Demon King. And I know how original. But before his journey even began, he was almost spawn camped by a dragon, when another person from Japan came in and saved him, quickly creating a bromance between these two. As we watch Kenji cover for Naruto's weaknesses in the field and Naruto's in the women department. Listen, I won't sugarcoat it. The thing is, every single woman that approaches our protagonist wants to take advantage of his good nature and use their powers for their own personal gains. That is where our other protagonist steps up. He prevents these girls from taking advantage of his friend while punishing them for doing it in the first place. And before you chuck it up as a bad revenge story, it couldn't be further from it. That's thanks to our protagonist. He's a jaded adult that's desperate to go home and doesn't want to leave the only person that treated him like an actual person behind. So he does seemingly evil things in order to protect his friend. There's a chapter where the guild doesn't want to let them rank up, so he invites the guild master out for drinks, where he extracts information out of her and finds out that she's been keeping them at low rank so they can't get access to better quests or equipment. So yeah, he solves the situation in the most unconventional way. And by no means am I condoning this next part, but he blackmails her. That's such a dickish way of solving the situation that it keeps me reading. Yeah, he solves the problems in an outlandish way, but he's doing it to get his best friend home. Listen, technically we're not here watching the hero's journey, and that becomes more apparent the longer we watch. His actions become more and more villainous in the guise of protecting his friend. We watch it slowly eroding at his humanity, and it makes you wonder, this story might not have a happy ending, and I need to know why. It's such an interesting story, the art is nice, the characters aren't one-dimensional, so I will give you a fair bit of warning. We pretty much follow the bad guy here. And if you can handle getting past the main character and his twisted personality and copious, and I mean copious amount of well-drawn adult scenes, give it a read. There's a nice twist that even I didn't expect. Part of growing up is accepting that you have to do things in your life that you not necessarily be proud of. Whether that includes jobs that you hate or working people that just makes you want to commit hate crimes. Life can be challenging or hard to deal with. Now, saying all that, a smile has never formed on my face this hard. I was expecting an isekai story about some loser going to another world with his kidnapped goddess, and instead, I read a story about a high schooler that's holding hostage the goddess that brought him there. And he won't return her home until he builds a harem of monsters that happens to be girls. Stupidity at its finest, basically Pokemon that you could fuck the isekai. Not everything that I can talk about I'm comfortable recommending, and this one's no exception either, since it feels like a bootleg version of Konosuba, with a clumsy goddess that allows herself to be brought into that world, and the main character is just a perverted madman. If I have to give this an analogy, Konosuba is a Coca-Cola while Monster Breeder is a Pepsi. I hope that analogy made sense, but whatever, it's a fun read. The word generic has been thrown around in a negative connotation for as long as it has existed. But just because something is generic necessarily doesn't mean that it's bad. Just take a look at Ice Spice, no creativity. When you take a look at the first volume's cover, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Bland? Unoriginal? For me, it's a destroyed booty hole. And I have to imagine for you, it would be a generic manga. And you would be half right. While it does do the same things that most isekai have done before, it somehow does it a bit better, if that made any sense. The story begins the same way all of them do. Some kid's playing the game when out of nowhere he's summoned into another country. But because he changed his class at the last second, he wasn't hailed as the foretold hero, and was promptly kicked out of the kingdom. But the thing that makes their story so special is our main character. He's just some chill dude that decides to live there after he found out that he couldn't go home. So instead of whining and crying about it, he does the only logical thing that he can do and strive to live in another world, while trying to become the legendary berserker. Chew! I said chew! Sorry about that. Every time I mention anything related to Fate fans just start appearing. It's hard getting rid of these buggers. Chew! It's nice reading a series that doesn't have the main character bitter after a simple betrayal. He isn't in the room seething thinking to himself, I'll make them pay. I'll make them all pay. Especially the princess. I'll let her pick out which rod she wants. The guy's an overpowered reincarnated dude that builds a harem that eventually rebels against the king. That's the best way I could describe it. The manga doesn't do anything outwardly special, but what it does do, it does decently well. Isekai Demo is about a goofy looking guy waking up in the middle of a forest in another world, where he tries to not become a victim. I'll keep this short and simple. He's an ordinary dude that has to survive in another world where everybody but him has magic, and pretty much anything and everything there could kill him. So he has to be clever without being perceived as too clever, gather information in secret as to not upset those in power, and end up getting executed. There are not that many isekais that keep me smiling after reading it, and it's all thanks to the world that our protagonist happens to appear in. The land feels otherworldly, it's extremely fun. We slowly explore a world that's filled with some of the most menacing creatures out there. You know how in most media, slimes are considered one of the weakest creatures out there? Our first introduction with a slime involved it doming one of the most powerful beasts in that forest, and then eating anything that moves. And this is what I mean, the world feels alive. There's a plant that if you eat it, it forces you to willingly walk over to a slime nest and be devoured. That's something that you find in Nat Geo. It's a detail so trivial, yet it adds so much to the world and how nature works in harmony with the creatures that live there. I'm getting a little bit too sidetracked. All this time I've been talking about the world and forgot to mention that the main character is a genius that has this twisted intelligence to him that keeps you wondering whether he's putting on a mask or pretending to be some guy who just wants to live an ordinary life, or whether he's just a psychopath manipulating those around him for his own personal gain. And the manga does an excellent job at portraying this. There are many moments of him being a carefree and goofy guy, but deep down there's something else going on in there, and it sets up this duality that makes you wonder who is he and why does he know how to do these things. I find that so intriguing since 90% of the protagonists have the personality of a Reddit nice guy. It sounds a little bit uneventful, but in practice, Shoukan manages to pull it off. For example, a few chapters in, and our protagonist raided a bandit camp and managed to capture a couple of them. And no matter what type of torture they were put through, none of them will rat out their leader. So through subtle observation, our main character was able to deduce that these guys didn't fear death. What they truly feared was something that was said as a throwaway line. The fear of becoming a zombie, a monster forced to fight forever. And through clever manipulation and putting them against each other, he was able to get a confession out of them. There are very few isekais where the main character is written to be smart, where they actually follow through with it. And I don't mean about the goofy ones, where the main character is the only one who ever thought about using 2 different spells to create something new. Anyone with 2 working brain cells could figure that out. No, I am talking about using basic information he gathered by talking to his bandits in order to manipulate a confession out of them. That's what I mean. Someone who understands the human nature and uses it against them. If you enjoy a story where the main character is weak and has to use his brain cells to get around, I highly suggest that you give this one a chapter or 2. I know after I'm done making this video, I am still going to be reading this one. I have never read, seen, or even thought about watching Baki. And most likely neither have you. Don't lie, it doesn't matter if you watch it or not. Because in Baki Gaiden, you follow Retsu, a Chinese martial artist that ended up dying after his fight with Musashi. Who was Musashi? No idea, he's alive, so it's not really all that important. But what is important, you follow Retsu on his journey to become the strongest reincarnate in that world. And we begin his unconventional journey with him, watching this gargantuan lizard eating a monster that turns anyone who looks at it to stone. And you know what's the first thing that comes to his mind? Wow, that lizard looks strong. Like a true New Yorker, I just have to instigate a fight. But before he was reincarnated for a second time, he was saved by an old man interrupting then chopping off that lizard man's tail. And how does Retsu thank our old hero for saving his life? By attacking him. I thought I was reading a fantasy isekai, not a documentary about some dude from the Bronx. That ignorance is unscalable. Baki Gaiden is extremely unconventional when it comes to their fight, and I know it's a fantasy manga, but there's this level of imagination that's rarely explored. When he was about to fight the big, tall lizard, the first thing that came to his mind was, he looks tough. Maybe his scales act like a natural armor. What will be his fighting stance? Will he be bipedal, or will he move on all 4s? Or maybe he'll fight like an alligator and use his powerful jaws in the death roll. All that thinking, all that planning makes the fight feel so engaging, making you wonder how he's gonna approach that fight when, BAM! Out of nowhere, this bastard uses his tail as a 3rd arm. So now he needs to think on his feet, figure out how to deal with that. More animes should have side characters dying and appearing in another world, because this might be one of the most amazing side stories I've read in quite a while. And from every series that exists, I would have never expected this from Baki. If you ever wondered how cool it would be for someone to body a dragon only using their fist, then you have to give this one a read. Life isn't about finding yourself, life is about creating yourself. A quote by another dead guy. Come on, sit down. I want to have a conversation with you. I want you to be honest with me, and I'll be honest back. What is the first thing that you would do if you became a woman tomorrow? Me, personally, I have self-respect and dignity. So maybe I'll start an OnlyFans. I need the money. This manga's about that, kinda. Our main character here is another 30-year-old dinosaur that ends up dying. Instead, he reincarnates inside the body of an orphan girl, and after having a wet dream, she decides that she's gonna live in the forest. By no means am I a detective, but with the clues that have been sprinkled in so far, I can tell you, a grown man wrote this, and had at least another grown man draw this. I can only imagine the conversation that they had. It might have went on something like this. Okay, so I need a panel of her fishing. Alright, how about this? Okay, it looks nice, but how about if she's only in her underwear, and can you make her wet? Do you mean yes? Nice. Not wanting to become a Lord's fleshlight, Ren decides that she's gonna live the rest of her life in the woods. I feel like I don't have to say this, but I'll still say it. This manga is an action adventure that's extremely lewd. Emphasis on the lewd part. There are some cool action scenes, but this manga is 90% fan service. For God's sake, chapter 4 is 13 pages of her digging for clams. Hey, wait a second. Why, good heavens, this art is far too good to be in this kind of work. It's almost as if it's taken a decade of painstakingly hard work to hone, but how? Come on, be honest with me, you're not reading this because it has an amazing story, you're here for the milkers and the plot. This manga doesn't take itself too seriously, it drops some light-hearted jokes. If you want the most accurate case study of what a guy would actually do if he became a woman, read this. I showed it to a couple of the boys and they said, yo, what's wrong with you? You can't be showing women our secrets. I've mentioned it in my Blue Lock video, but I would prefer receiving enhanced interrogation by the most hate-filled person that have ever walked the earth than to ever willingly sit down and watch a non-contact sport. But unfortunately, I haven't mastered the art of Shadow Clone Jutsu yet, so for now let me talk about the next best thing and talk about a manga. Like I said, I'm not a big fan of sports manga, but I like this one a lot more than I thought I would. The story is weird and interesting. Our main character ends up dying in a car crash as he's returning home from a game and ends up in front of God. So God gives him one of two options. Either stay here in heaven and rot, or help the weak nation of freedom reach the top, and he'll reward him with a second chance at life. So what's the first thing our main character do when he wakes up in Gaia? He instigate a diplomatic war between two nations by thoroughly insulting the representative of the werewolf nation. And not only that, he bet his life on top of it. I swear to God, if it wasn't for the fact that there's a fairy there, I would have thought this was set in the Bronx. It's rare for a protagonist in this genre to have some kind of backbone, let alone the swagger to actually instigate a fight. Most of it coming from our main character, Taichi. Taichi is arrogant and confident, not because he's given a magical ability that will always give him a strike, because he uses everything that he learned in his past life to gain an upper hand. That's not to undermine the fact that he's worked hard to hone his skills to the point that even in the new world, he's able to play with the strongest races there. He feels like an actual person, he's there to accomplish his goal and go home to see his family. But what really draws me in is the author is able to make baseball seem so fun and cool. And I fucking hate baseball. Okay, I'm exaggerating a little bit. He's able to turn this mundane sport about hitting a ball into this deep psychological game where the simple act of hiding a ball before you throw it could come off as an invisible pitch. This author is able to make a changeup seem like one of the most impossible balls to hit. And I just have to say, it looks so badass and cool that I just can't help but to get excited watching it. But more importantly, this manga has great art. The author knows the important parts of baseball. Hell, it even turned me into a baseball fan. Give it a read. If you're apprehensive about starting an isekai because of its stigma, this one is a great beginner isekai. I really enjoyed this one, and it's a goofy, well-drawn story. Hey there kiddos, it's God's fair mistake, and today we're gonna survive 100 days in Isekai land. Day 1, I fell down a hole and landed in fantasy land. Day 2, I got some wood. Day 3, I maxed out my special ability and decided to defeat the Demon Lord. Day 4, I built a dungeon. Day 5, I filled my dungeon with my harem. Day 6, is that my personal pet slave named subscribe and like the video? And maybe you too might get a lowly elf slave. Day 7, I realized this bit went on long enough. Okay, all jokes aside, this manga's wild. We went from mining for diamonds to how many holes our main character could fill. This story is about Subaru waking up in the middle of a forest and basically spends his day playing Minecraft, but in real life. Until he's brutally assaulted in the middle of the night by his dark elf queen. So she gives him two options: stay here in the middle of a forest and become alligator food, or come with me and help rebuild our town. The story is funny. I had a fun time reading this one. It was just so fun and creative. Watching this watered down version of Subaru slowly build a city with the help of a colorful cast of characters. You can tell that the person who wrote this enjoyed playing Minecraft. They add little Easter eggs throughout the story, like the infinite water source. Sorry, I don't know anything more about Minecraft. Unlike your favorite YouTuber, my hard drive is clean. The manga is fast-paced, so you will see yourself breezing through these chapters. Also, the same person who's writing this made another isekai that I'm fond of. Spoilers, it's about a guy getting isekai into space. Maybe you might see it later on in the video, I don't know. If freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent may we be led. Like sheep to a slaughter, a quote by another dead guy. It was a quote that I strongly believed in until I started reading this hate crime disguised as a form of entertainment. Give me a second, this is gonna be painful. Let me do some stretching. Alright, if I could describe the 10 chapters that I read in one simple word, it would be generic. 3 high schoolers get kidnapped to another world, where they are forced to fight this big bad demon lord. But one of the edgier ones refuses the king's order to fight, so the king sends him to his room without any dinner. So he rebels by turning himself into Tuxedo Man. The fact that this has 40 plus chapters and is already translated has made me extremely and utterly disappointed with mankind. We do not deserve freedom. No. You know when Mushoku Tensei did the old man and comes back as a toddler gimmick? You would have expected artists to learn and improve, but I want you to take a second and think about it, right? Kids in Fantasyland are, well, more or less the same like kids here. So when was the last time you heard a fucking 4-year-old speak perfect English and say something intelligent? Never, that's when. But to quickly summarize, Future Dude dies in the building collapse while saving a bunch of his students, and he's brought to another world, where we follow a journey of a fetus teaching animal people that if they wash their hands, they won't catch COVID. Now, before criticizing this manga, I just want to say my drawing skills are on par with an epileptic kid mid-seizure. So not good. But I am very confident that I could write better than this author. The manga feels like it was something that was made in the early 2000s. Yet, it came out 2 years ago. Our protagonist here died, and instead of being sent to a fantasy world, he's instead reincarnated back on Earth, where he spends his newly found life fighting monks. There's better things out there to read, like, I don't know, maybe a dictionary? Okay, hear me out, right? Can the first thing that we now learn about our protagonist is that he's a fetus with the ability to nuke a country? I mean, yeah, it's nice that we know that our little self-insert has the ability to beat the big bad guy, but I want something to go with the visual flair that's being presented to us. Like, I don't know, a personality maybe? That's just me. I'm speaking nonsense. Alright, I'm not gonna lie to you, it is a bit funny being a newborn baby and seeing your newly begotten elf mother get her cheeks clapped. I wish more isekai added this. Okay, never mind, 1 page turn later, it is revealed that she's not his mother, but his half-stepsister? Damn, this author really wanted to make their points clear. I get it, you like Mushoku Tensei a little bit too much. Back in middle school, before children's rights were a thing, there would be a teacher that hated my guts. Like, they would make clan members' hatred for other ethnicities seem like a mild spat compared to the hatred that this person had for me. Justifiably so, I was a bastard growing up. If I could sleep in your class, I would go out of my way just to sleep there. Don't worry, I'm getting to the point of it. But that teacher would slam a gigantic textbook right in front of me. And I would open it and I would be visually assaulted with this massive text wall that if I could read, I would have been insulted at that time. As much as I love world building, could the first thing I not see in the series is a barrage of text? There are more words on this page than there's actual art. It feels like I'm reading a light novel. You can tell if a series is going to be fun to read depending on how much it over-explains our world. Like, why am I supposed to care how much an apple costs if you're never going to bring that up again? Dude dies, meets a handsome god, and is teleported into the middle of a forest where he eventually meets his elf semen receptacle. Nothing happens for like 10 chapters, and, well, at least the chapters are quick. Boring, but quick. Also, I feel like I should add this, but he meets a friendly cave dragon, like in another better series. Ryouridou. Sometimes I like to believe that authors plaster the word isekai to sell more copies, right? Because here you have a high schooler waking up in an island, and the first thing that he thinks of is, oh wow, I must not be in Japan anymore. These fishes, they don't look Japanese. Let me whip out my large hunting knife and my water filter, which I bring to school on a daily occurrence. And like the only thing going through my head is like, is it so hard to set this manga like a cruise ship that got wrecked? Why bring Isekai into this? It makes no sense. There's nothing otherworldly about this manga. It's a survival harem manga from the early 2000s masquerading as an isekai. Alright, I'll be the brave one in the room and say it. Bad isekai follows a certain formula. It begins like this. A main character is so ridiculously broken that he could beat the big bad guy by blinking. Their harem consisting of a slave, elf, dark elf, or a loli. Sometimes maybe all of them packed into one character. Hey, that's bad isekai wish fulfillment, what can you do? And then there's the isekai that caters to the female demographic. And just like bad isekai lovers, some of y'all are equally down bad. Every single villainous story begins the same way. A socially inept girl dies in some tragic way and is reincarnated in another world without missing a beat. 90% of the time, their mothers would also die, and their immediate family would despise them. By no means did I major in psychology, I have too much self-respect for that. But the fact that this is a staple for the villainous genre should worry some mothers. Now, saying all of that, I kinda enjoyed this one. I wouldn't recommend it, but it was entertaining. It begins with our bookworm protagonist dying and reincarnating as a nobleman's daughter. A few chapters in, and they do something unique where they kidnap her to another country, and has to find a way to survive and get back home. Pretty cool setup, but it's just not for me. Cucked to death. Cuck to death. He was cucked to death? In all my years of reading isekai, I never thought I would have to utter those words. The main character comes home early one day to find his wife in the bed with another man. The shock from finding his wife getting her donut glaze had him running outside to the arms of a truck, where the goddess gave him the overpowered ability to seal other married women from their husbands. So in another word, NTR the isekai. And you know what's the craziest part about me saying all of that? It's that this is the second isekai to have NTR as the main theme. The fact that there's more than 0 has me amazed. You know what? I'm calling it right now. Authors are becoming lazier and lazier with their explanations of how people are appearing in another world. That there will come in an isekai where a giant magical door will open right in front of our protagonist saying, "Hey, you're next, get in." And they will look at their parents and go, "Alright, I guess it's my turn to go on the dangerous adventure to fight the Demon Lord, I guess." Do not worry, mother, I will find someone at the slave market. They always have an available girlfriend or two. And this story begins like that too. Mako ends up appearing in another world where she immediately becomes the mother of 2 orphan dog people. Aside from that, there's nothing notable that she goes through. Every issue that comes across her, she almost immediately finds a solution for it. It's kind of disappointing. The moment they introduced boys, the Bechdel test went out the window almost immediately. You know what? No matter whatever gender our main character might be, a self-insert would always be a self-insert. The fact that she can do anything doesn't make her a good character. I'm trying to read a manga about someone suffering, not about a girl who's only hated superficially. This kinda breaks my heart to read. The comment section for all these type of isekai, I always find a lot of people saying that this is literally me. Wow, this is like looking in the mirror, which baffles me, right? I understand while you may share some similar qualities to these caricature of a person, you can never compare that to you as an individual, because these characters are just a template with no deeper thought put into it, which makes making fun of these kind of protagonists kinda sad. Look at me spraying a little bit of positivity. I mean, that's not gonna stop me, but the story begins with the introduction of our protagonist, Satoshi, a 29-year-old plus-size model that happens to pass away mid-sleep, and is then transported to another world as a complete opposite of who he was. And that's the type of problems that I have with these type of isekai. It's escapism without the actual work needed to make it good. So he dies and is reincarnated in the body of someone more handsome, physically fit. You know, not you. Under normal circumstances, he still would have had his former mental disabilities limiting how he would interact with other people. But from the moment that he dies and comes to another world, he becomes a polar opposite of who he was, without the trials and tribulation. And listen, I'm a bottom-dwelling isekai connoisseur, but I just don't consume just any trash. Our time is very limited and we don't have all day to consume garbage. Okay, I know I'm about to say something really morbid, but I just have to say it. Imagine being able to dodge a car that was almost about to hit you, but instead it crashes into a truck right in front of you, and you're thinking to yourself, wow, I dodged the bullet. Only for the truck's last-ditch attempt to murder you, it detaches its wheel to final destination you. Made me giggle a little. Now, for the actual story, there's not really much to it. It follows the same old cliches that you would expect. Infinite powers, bland, and a mystical comic relief of a pet. Sometimes I believe giving something 10 chapters to form an opinion is being a little bit too generous. And then I read said thing, and the only thing that comes to my mind is, yeah, I could be doing anything with my time, but instead I'm here reading an isekai where the main character gets a harem by farming. And I mean, it wouldn't be that bad if the main character was fun to watch, but instead, he finds ways of not only dropping the bar, but also kicking it deeper into the ground. I wouldn't have minded as much if it wasn't for this barrage of text that have nothing important to say. Nothing meaningful is being added aside from him building, again, a harem kingdom. I never understood why authors in these isekais have to beat you over the head with the one character trait that their protagonists have. Like, I'm not gonna forget that she's a college student that likes fantasy stories, especially if you keep mentioning it every single 5 pages. Unless I have Alzheimer's, I won't forget. The story is about our protagonist, an unemployed college student. One night, as she's walking home, she falls to the floor and ends up in another world. From then on, she tries to survive as a scholar. There's something that I managed to pick up on female-centric isekai, and that's the insufferable amount of false villain characters. There's most likely a scientific term for this, but I'm just gonna call it that for now. In a large amount of these isekais, the lover/rival are always shown to be these kind of bad people that are willing to do anything and anything to make the people around them suffer. That's fine and all, but it's not really followed up on because it turns out they were never really evil. Someone just stole their blanket, and the fact that you were there to beat some sense into them made them realize how silly they were being, and that must do nothing but good. In layman terms, everybody's bad until they meet the protagonist, then they're good. You know what, I think authors who write isekai might just all be robots. Hear me out, right? Every time that I read someone who doesn't understand human emotions, 100% of the time, they make a two-dimensional villain. And the moment they're defeated, here comes a sad backstory that's never hinted at or made any sense, making the villain sympathetic and relatable, even getting our hero to shed a tear. And I'm just here thinking to myself, this should be an emotional moment where a main character relates to the villain, since deep down they're all the same, with the only difference in their life was the path that each of them chose. But here's the thing, right? It would be relatable if the protagonist wasn't a damn self-insert. Oh my god! And if the other characters weren't such a one-dimensional joke. I'll save you some time and let you know, if isekai was popular in the early 2000s, you would get this kind of story. About a kid with no magical abilities to fish himself a mermaid wife and then spends the rest of his farming days dealing with the world's shenanigans. Primitive technology has to be one of my favorite YouTube channels out there. It's pretty cool seeing someone build homes and furnaces out of bricks or even mud. Personally speaking, I kinda find survival content to be one of the most mesmerizing things out there. I just wish the manga focused more on it. Instead, we have Kazuya, the typical Japanese high schooler who's a survival otaku. He ends up dying in a traffic accident and ends up reincarnating in the middle of nowhere in another world, with the magical ability that he gains skills from whatever food that he eats. It is an interesting premise, except he's just building a harem in the middle of a forest. Okay, I'm not much of a fan of the whole reincarnating as a little kid thing, mainly because they waste a lot of time doing absolutely nothing. Many of the stories don't implement it well, and usually it comes off as lazy or uninspired. Yet, Isekai Choukoukoukyuu, I'm not pronouncing that, manages to do it decently well. Apparently, our main character has been reincarnated in the body of an abandoned child. What is an abandoned child? Well, the name says it all. Well, in his brief stay in the forest, he meets a griffin who appointed him as the king of the orphans, and now has 3 years to build a town and teach the children how to survive by themselves or starve. It's up to them. Go big or go home, and you know which one's not pickable. It's nice not getting beat over the head with this massive text while explaining every single little thing that the authors want to implement into that world. Almost as if an author can understand how to properly pace the series. It feels natural. We learn at the same pace as our main character. He goes out, explore, creates relationships, and creates political connections that will eventually help him create a kingdom. It got great writing and a fun cast of characters. We watch as more orphans come to the village, and little by little the village begins to grow into a kingdom of their own. If you want to feel like your life has not amounted to anything, give this one a read. The story is about an American that's sent to another world where he'll liberate the inhabitants of that world from the pesky oppressive grip that's known as life. Okay, bad joke aside, I can proudly say that's not what I expected, but in a good way. I thought a guy with a gun in a new world was going to be this overpowered loser who was just going to build a harem of elf girls, with the added caveat that he'll eliminate anything that moves. But instead we get a high-octane adventure about an FPS player trying to survive in a fantasy world that's filled with creatures that are dangerous and creatively designed. Just look at this harpy thing. It peels back its fucking face so it can shoot a laser out of her mouth. The art looks phenomenal. It looks like a mixture between Promised Neverland and Gantz. Although I'm not a fan of the main character's design, you're not here to watch him dress up. You're here to watch him fight a gigantic sky fortress that devours anything and everything that it sees, with only an M16 and a drive to keep his last party member alive. And that's why I read manga. To see these characters tested and overcome these obstacles just bring a smile out of my face. I was just enjoying this fascinating, deep geopolitical isekai where they explore the tricky subject of tribal migration while trying to establish a shop in a town that's filled with people who view them as nothing more than pig-eating savages. Unfortunately, I caught up to the latest chapter and had to check the next manga off of my list. And boy was I not surprised, it's a Konosuba parody done infinitely worse. So a perverted idiot dies and is granted eternal salvation in Valhalla, but instead wants to build a harem of slaves, and will not stop until he does. Well, after being reborn, he kicks and struggles until he accidentally ends up dragging the useless goddess to another world, where they must figure out a way to defeat the demon lord and return the goddess home. The thing is, Konosuba had an interesting cast of characters and great comedy. This has everything watered down because the characters have a personality of two used condoms. I'm not saying that if I was given an army, I would become the biggest man that's known to mankind. I'm just saying history is written by the winners. I better stop making any more jokes like this, if not my name will be added to another list. Fuck you, Santa, I've been a good kid this year. So as to distract you from that statement, let's talk about a manga. Isekai Apocalypse is about Ida Takuto, our formerly bedridden main character that finally died at the age of 18. Sorry if I sounded a little bit too excited, it's not every day that we have an actual adult as a protagonist in this genre. Well, he ends up coming back as an evil god in his favorite game, Eternal Nations, and we're thrown into this journey as we watch Ricky Berwick and his girlfriend start a civilization. Well, to be more precise, he starts an evil civilization, basically America. I like dark stuff, what can I say, I used to be edgy. And Isekai Apocalypse scratches that urge that I want from an unconventional story. We watch as our main character secretly creates a civilization by making these eldritch monsters that slowly transform the lands. Why secretly? Well, because he spawned in between two gigantic nations that will wipe them off the map if they're discovered. So it becomes this high-stake journey where our main character has to secretly build up his military strength without being discovered. Even though I call it an evil civilization, they're not as evil as the name implies. Aside from the main character and his love interest, they're just a group of refugees trying to survive in a world that has persecuted them. So you have to imagine it from their perspective. If someone came after you, slaughtered your family, wouldn't you want to get revenge? Do anything and everything possible to make them pay? After all, they're only evil from the perspective of other nations. I don't know, Eren did nothing wrong. If you like civilization building games with a dark undertone, then you might enjoy this manga. The world full of monsters starts with our main character committing vehicular manslaughter, and like any true psychopath, he leaves the scene of the crime to go home and sleep. And when he wakes up, he sees that his town is overrun by monsters. So, our main character uses his knowledge about video games to build a class around his physical weaknesses. I'll be honest with you, a world full of monsters has a lot of things that I dislike in a bad isekai. Overly abundant video game tropes, the typical, I have to hide my true abilities and keep a distance from the people that I secretly help. But if you can see past these tropes, give it a read. And it's a fun read. The main character has somewhat of a brain and it's really cool seeing him use his powers in creative ways like dropping a fridge on the goblin. And see, that's something that I would do. I would collect a bunch of boulders and make death rain from above. I would become the biggest man that's known to mankind. Oh, and monsters too, I guess. Do you know what Newton's third law is? I'm asking because I don't know. But what I do know is, it must be very difficult to survive a fridge falling from a 10-story building. And it's kinda satisfying watching him level up and work on his classes. I cannot tell if there's gonna be a continuation to the light novel, so I don't want you getting all attached to it, so I'll be brief. Dude wakes up in another world as a sorcerer that was meant to destroy the world, but he wakes up a little bit too late, and the people who summoned him died a while ago. So he does the only rational thing that a person in his situation would do. He builds himself a stone waifu. I don't know what the lessons are, but if you wanna find true love, then build a bitch, I guess. Alright, sit down, I'm not proud to say this, but Space Mercenary the Isekai is kind of enjoyable. Wait, hear me out, please. Like the title says, it's some dude who woke up in the strongest ship. In a world that resembles his favorite video game and just accepts that that's his new life. So he goes around exploring the new world, fighting some space Somali pirates and clapping space elf cheeks. Why space elf cheeks? I don't know, beats me. But nonetheless, I'm still glad that it exists, as silly as I may sound. Starship is like that one kid in your classroom, sitting in the corner eating glue. Looking at him from a distance is horrifying, even appalling at times. But when you get close and ask him a question, he brings you into this magical world of glue eating and it's wonderful. I might even say it's the purest form of escapism yet. The main character is brought to his new world. What's the first thing that he does? He put some pirates on a t-shirt and made some money. And what's his overpowered world-breaking, race-enslaving magical ability? The strap. That's it. He's just an average Joe with a good ship and some common knowledge. I'm tired of reading these isekai where the main character is too afraid to look at women. And you know the ones that I'm talking about. Excuse me, my lady. I'm sorry, but I'm gonna have to reject your advances, for you see, in Japan, the land where I originate from, having premarital coitus is heavily frowned upon. Also, I know I am surrounded by a bunch of half-naked women throwing themselves at me. But I only value the true beauty in a woman with long black hair. So, for the rest of you multiracial harlots, get out of my sight! By chapter 5, he's already making plans to become a dad. By chapter 10, he's already violated every code in the Geneva Convention, just so he could buy a house and clap cheeks. I love when media knows it's just there to entertain you, so it doesn't try hiding its action behind a veneer of self-righteousness. If you want a space odyssey with intergalactic politics, you won't find it here. But if you do want to watch a degenerate living his best life in space, then here you go. It's fun, exciting, and simple to read. I've had water with more flavor than the people who find this enjoyable. Well, our protagonist Shinji here is at the bottom of his school social cast. One day his class got caught up in a mass summoning and now has to run an orphanage in another world. It's everything that you would expect from these type of stories. He finds a slave girl, heals her, and well, you can use your imagination to fill in the rest, like he will to her later. But me personally, I wouldn't be recommending this manga, unless you're homeless or looking to fill a hole, non-consensually though. No! I must stop myself from using slavery magic! Our hero Satoshi was summoned to the Magic Kingdom of Cry Road as a hero candidate, but unfortunately, when they checked his level, he had the same stats as a normal adult. Not needing him, they sent him home. And that experience forever changed him, creating this urge, this drive to see the magical world again. That was unexpected. I never thought they would send him home and innovate in such a fantastic way. Discovering that there's another world that he's desperate to return to, a world full of magic. Nah, I'm just fucking with you. They kicked him to the curb to die. Well, not to waste any more of your time, he kills one slime and gets unlimited magic and learns every spell, and the girls like him, and the magical wolf Fenrir came out to beat him, but he beat it in one punch because he's super cool. So Fenrir fell in love with him and it turned itself into a cute girl. Yeah, that's a good story. Now where did I put my crayons? I want to write the bad guy next. The only, and I mean the only thing I'll give praise to is there's a page where he has to fight the urge to not use enslaving magic. It had me giggling. Originality is defined by the Oxford Dictionary as having the ability to think independently and creatively. I would like to believe having the ability to think creatively is something that every creature is born with. Except the mangaka who wrote this. I have no idea how Japanese plagiarism laws work, but I'm pretty damn sure this is a protagonist from Myoyu in the same pose too. Just a little bit poorly drawn. Well, our hero No Name bites the dust and is reborn as a human that's being raised by demons in the demon army that's currently subjugating humanity because they hate humans. Not gonna lie, it sounds interesting, even exciting, but don't be fooled like I was. There's nothing exciting to see here. He just nukes people calling it magic, and when we're introduced to his story, he's already a demon general with his multiracial harem. So there's not even the aspect of watching him grow. I have a question, a very interesting question, a very deep question, a very profound question. If you wish to find the answers to this question, then you must go to the ends of the earth, and here it is. If a main character is physically young, but mentally older, will he get arrested by the FBI? Not a haiku by me, I can't be that creative, but by a fellow degenerate in the comment section. The only reason why I'm asking this is because it will come up later. Well, Leon here is blessed with creation magic, and, well, as you would expect, everybody there considers it terrible because nobody there was able to figure out that you can make swords out of dirt. Well, at least until our protagonist was born. Another staple of generic isekais. You can't be having adults with more than 2 working brain cells at any living time in that world. How else would Satoshi shine? You have to relate to our poor underdog who's so smart. Matter of fact, he's such an underdog, a dumb nobody, that his childhood friend is a princess. And his other friend is the granddaughter of the sword maiden. Now before I go on, this will be my one and only warning. If you do not want your rectum spread like peanut butter on rye bread, skip this part because you too will be added to a list. The story begins with both our main character and his love interest at 7 years old, exchanging mana. Making that statement alone already made me feel like this will be my last video. I never thought turning a page would be so frightening. As I'm typing this right now, they're knocking down my door. I was going straight to jail after reading this first chapter alone. Alright, he gets introduced to his love interest and then bam, jail. Sorry, I jumped the story a little bit. We go straight into the bathhouse scene. And if it wasn't bad enough, it somehow manages to get worse. Because he starts moving mana from her lower abdomen, which makes her moan. Why is it there? Well, I don't know. But if you ever do find out, please don't tell me. Keep that stretching to yourself. Well, I want you to take that one scene and repeat it again and again to his ever-growing harem of underage girls. Listen, just don't read it. Not only was it bad getting sent to jail for making this review, it wasn't even worth it. My cellmate doesn't even cuddle. If you like monster girls or demi-human girls, then a story about a guy living with them sounds like it would be right up your alley, right? Cute non-human girls doing non-human girl things. The title hooked me, it had me by the heartstring. But after reading the first chapter, I felt bamboozled. I felt like the world beneath me started to crumble. The story begins with a protagonist waking up in another world. Doesn't explain how he got there, he just wakes up, sprouts some wing, and goes outside. And I kid you not, the first thing that he sees is a 1,000-year-old semen demon calling itself a dragon. But instead of wanting men in essence, she wants chocolate. And from then on, he just assembles a harem of slaves or prepubescent monster girls. Sometimes both. 2 volumes in there's nothing to a story outside of him dressing up as a demon lord. You know, every time that I read a story like this, it impresses me how they're able to make nothing unreadable for 10 chapters. Alright, legally speaking, my lawyer has advised me to disavow anything and everything the main character will say, will do, and has ever done. Let me ask you a simple question. What would you do if you could stop time? Yeah. Keep talking. Give me a second, officer. Yeah, that's the man over there. He's the one who said he'll do unspeakable horrors onto humanity. He said Bill Cosby had rookie numbers. Alright, Time Stop Hero is about Kuzuno and his ability to stop time. And I know what you're thinking. And stop, you fucking degenerate. He doesn't use it like that. I think. I only read up to chapter 10. Kuzuno is given a controller that allows him to pause the world at any given time. And it also gives him an infinite amount of time to deal with whatever issues come up. But he's also on a timer and has to finish whatever quest that was given to him before the 3 days are up, or else he will die. Or fail, we don't know. And that's what he's trying to avoid. Which leads to some of the funniest outcome I've seen in a while. For example, sorry to spoil this early on, but he has to fight this Lovecraftian monster, so he stops times and tries to kill it, except he's unable to. So we watch him go on this marvelous journey of self-discovery and training, which lasted 8 months, but for the people watching it, it only took a blink of an eye. And I know most of the people hearing this already made a mental note thinking this is a generic isekai, and that it couldn't be further from the truth. The mangaka knows the tropes that plague this genre, and masterfully subverts it to tell a very funny and engaging story. I know the manga has this perverted main character flashing panties and being a perverted nuisance, so I have to imagine that will turn off a lot of people, but if you could get past that, you'll find yourself reading a really funny story about a guy trying to survive in another world. Also, they're the person who wrote Princess Resurrection, and I'm a huge fan of it. Like an unwanted child support, now I'm physically obligated to support it. You know, after writing a couple of these, it becomes increasingly more difficult to write an opening statement because, like, what am I gonna say? This was so bad that it resurrected my grandfather just so he could die a second time, except this time he's disappointed with my poor life decisions. I have some dignity, I can't take the easy way out and go off on a tangent, talking about, oh boy, there's the worst isekai I've ever read, because you can only say something bad like a limited amount of time. Okay, you know what? I'll take a different approach, right? I'll be more positive. Hey, do you want a main character with a personality that's more interesting than a wet blanket, in a world where consequences do not exist? And have you ever felt inadequate with your drawing skills? Well, have shame no more, because here in Harem Thief Order, what a great name by the way, we have characters that are drawn beautifully by someone's feet. Matter of fact, it's so inspirational, it's giving me hope in becoming an artist one day. And do you find it annoying that female characters are written to have like a personality and motivations? Well, apparently so does this author, so none of that exists here. Come on down and read this work of art. I can never understand why most isekais have to try and justify a reason why the little self-insert have to be in that world. Like, okay, given black hair, dark eyes, I don't need a 30-page spread letting me know that those traits are rare and they don't belong in that country. I wouldn't have such an issue with it except that it's brought up in so many isekais. And I would ignore it if they would just bring it up naturally in conversations. It feels so forced and unnatural that I'm willing to bet my left nut that many of these isekai authors haven't had a conversation with someone in a long time. But yeah, getting back on topic, the only positive thing that I could say about this isekai is that it's well drawn. If it wasn't so poorly written, I would at least suggest taking a look at it. It's about a monk who ends up getting betrayed by his closest companion and ends up getting reincarnated in another world as a magic-less son of a noble. And because he can't use magic there, he uses Japanese magic from before he died. That makes no sense, but hey, whatever, it's the story that he's trying to tell. Who am I to poke holes in this logic? This had to be the dumbest premise ever. Vibrator Hero. A haiku that took way too long to make by Angel's Error. College dude dies while holding onto his friend's vibrator and is sent to another world where he uses it as a weapon. I'll save you the time, no, it doesn't work as a comedy. It doesn't even work as an ecchi manga. And it definitely doesn't work as a decent isekai. That at least piques your curiosity by making the world interesting. It's as bland and uninteresting as you can get. Our protagonist here saves a cat from drowning, forgetting that he's allergic to cats. Well, he ends up sneezing and ends up falling to his death, where we find out that the cat that he saved is an immortal servant of the god in front of him. Being thankful, she gives him another chance at life, where they proceed to do everything that I mentioned 30 other times before, with the exception that instead of having him pamper a member of his harem, he instead does it with cats. Moral of the story, cats are bad. Get a German Shepherd, they're cute. if you started watching anime after the Attack on Titan boom. The early 2000s had a problem with fan service being rampant in most animes. Not that seeing a character pop a titty from time to time was an issue. It was just how it was implemented, and where it was implemented. You could have a character having a deep philosophical discussion whether ending someone's life was really necessary. And like clockwork, the main character would end up taking a step and somehow end up groping 3 girls, a grandma, and someone's mother in a split second. And that was considered funny. And unfortunately, this manga's a relic of those times. A poorly constructed relic, but a relic nonetheless. 2 boys end up transported to another world where they must find a way of slaying a vampire. However, one of these boys refuses and instead befriends her. Together they go on a journey to find a way of uniting humans and monsters. A fan service filled isekai, that's about it. Satoshi was one day playing his favorite BR MMO game when a sudden power outage transported him to another world where he ends up saving a Dutch and his granddaughter. Yeah, I would add more, but it becomes redundant. There's nothing interesting here. Dude just wants to farm a land where he could sell products while being overpowered.
Are you winning, son?
If you made it this far into this video, then you already know there's something messed up and wrong with me. I'm not even gonna sugarcoat it. Half the stuff that I already said will land me in Guantanamo Bay. Listen, FBI-chan, when I said I'll redefine the use of a carpet, I meant like in Aladdin, you know. Fly through the sky to a brand new world of destruction. Our main character wakes up in another world about to be attacked by a gigantic centipede, which he immediately squishes. Well, as he's wandering through the dark, confused and in a daze, he encounters a party fighting off some mysterious creatures. While pleading for some help, they berate him for being in a dungeon by himself and stab him in the leg before running away. Just as he was about to get up, he's attacked by a wolf, and if this situation couldn't get any worse, the same party member that attacked him shot a fireball behind him, scorching him and the wolf. Wow, that got dark really quickly, and I'm not even talking about the early 2000 punk scene. I'm talking about that one kid in your class that's Midnight Shade. I like it. It's not every day where a story makes you feel like that. That if I got out of that situation alive, then you better start going into hiding, because I will introduce Isekai to the brass bowl. The story is interesting. While most isekais will be focusing on the power system and the fights going on, this one takes a more realistic take on the human psychology, and it's nicely mixed in with his stats. The more that it rises, the more he's confused. So we follow him on this journey to go home and unravel many mysteries like why is he there, and what happened to his sister. The story knows how to build tension and mystery. Give it a read if you have the time, or if anything I said might have sounded interesting. On page 17, the main character was offered some horned rabbit meat, and that scene alone had nothing out of the ordinary except for maybe in the hundreds of isekais that I read, had them. And only a handful of them was it ever implemented well. And it made me realize how big Dragon Quest really is, right? The first time these creatures were ever implemented into something was in the Dragon Quest series. And now, almost 3 decades later, the tropes in the fantasy series are overused and they're used as these stock templates of a monster. The story centers around Amanta building a store in another world while he's raising his adoptive daughter. It has very good art, but the characters are what you expect. The main character is just another stock template of other main characters. I think I've mentioned it before, but once a textbook explaining everything about the world comes into my line of sight, my brain has a tantrum and shuts down. I'm reading a manga, does the author not understand? Show, not tell? You have to excuse me if I'm being presumptuous, but isn't the point of a manga to use images to fill in what's missing from the text? But whatever. Isekai dude dies, appears in another world, and follows the same old story beats. Okay, we've had a salaryman in another world, a dietitian in another world, a Kardashian in another world, and now we have a zookeeper in another world. I swear to God, this genre is becoming more and more saturated, that instead of putting children on t-shirts, they're starting to take professions too. Oh boy, I can't wait for YouTuber in another world, where he has to use his fame and followers to defeat the demon lord. Oh, I already have an idea. He polls his followers to see if he should either buy the animal girl or the lowly elf slave. I'm calling it right now. If it does come out, I want residuals. Listen, I put in the work, it was my idea. Anyways, here we have a zookeeper transported to another world, in the hopes that he could live out his dream of opening a phantom beast zoo. It's kinda boring. Now, even though I said that, I don't like to classify this manga as such, since you could tell the person who had to draw it did an exceptional work. Everything looks so well drawn and full of vigor. But the issue that I have, although the main character has a defined personality, it's still poorly implemented into that world. If it was funny, I would give it a pass, since again, the artist tried his hardest to make a mundane dialogue have some zest to it. But yeah, it's middle of the road, to be honest. You know what? In hindsight, I should have numbered these. In the 40 or something isekais that I read, I have never been at a loss for words until I read this one. We have a protagonist who's best friends with a character from Iken. All of them ending up getting transported to another world with exceptional skills except for our main character. But wait, it's not done yet. He ends up getting transported again where he finds a computer that lets him input whatever stats that he wants. And he gets transported one more time, except this time it's in front of a slave trader, where he saves his life, but the only thing that he wants in return is a slave. Then that said slave gets stolen and has a lesbian awakening. Not only were they willing to fight the god of death, but they were willing to fight God himself in order to save him. And all of this is happening while he sits back and enjoys his harem of slaves. What am I reading? This is like watching a 10-pile car crash. I know it's not good for me, but the sheer absurdity is making it impossible for me to stop watching it. No, don't try having a heartwarming moment now. You don't deserve it. Humor me, what's the point of setting your story in an isekai if it has nothing to do with his past life or bring it up in any meaningful way? Isn't the point of an isekai to follow the story of a regular guy from our world living out in a fantasy world? I understand if you want to keep his backstory hidden for like maybe a plot reveal down the line, but the fact that I read 10 chapters and I didn't know that he was from another world until I read the description is a pretty big issue. I finished thinking, oh, this is a pretty bad fantasy manga, but no, this was just an above average isekai. What's the point of building up these mundane scenes if they don't build up to the character? I would have understood if it was meant to build character or plot points or even a decent backstory, yet there hasn't been one moment where the main character dies and is thinking to himself, you know what, I miss my parents. I wonder if they're doing alright. I understand the whole sacrificing yourself for your friends thing, it's kinda chivalrous, but can we get a little bit of backstory with his family? To show that he's a loving, caring person, not just a stock template of a character. But there's one thing that just weirds me out, and that's the whole I died so I'll reincarnate inside of a living child. Like, where's the kid's soul? Beats me, I don't know, I don't care. I just want to join the adventure guild and build my harem. Oh, and don't forget the fact that he's an overpowered 5-year-old. It will forever baffle me how many of these bad isekais get published. I thought it was a parody, but the longer I kept on reading, I noticed for a parody, it was taking itself way too seriously. The main character had his character hacked and deleted, so the first thing that he thinks about is committing Sudoku.
You naughty naughty, you teasing me, you naughty naughty.
This would have been fine and all, but no, this is still fucking stupid. And it only makes it dumber when he later watches another man dying in the battlefield and compares it to his death. No, you don't get to think you had a justified end. The main character had a backup character that had all his other stuff on it. Like what? I don't know what to say. Like, take a second and think about it. The man had his character deleted, so he whipped out the noose. I can never relate because I know how grass feels, but don't most MMOs have like some kind of failsafe just in case a character gets deleted? This man any percented his life. I can almost imagine the moment that his character got deleted, a timer popped up and he was going for the world record. Hey kiddo, is Goblin Slayer too dark and scary? And does it bother you that not every race has a good looking Kuma bait of a love interest? Well, let me introduce you Goblin Slayer Light, where you can enjoy a story similar to Goblin Slayer without the pesky plot or character development getting in the way. The manga might be the goofiest thing I have read in a long time. I was feeling jaded reading 100 or something isekais when this beautiful 7-power car crash descended onto my screen. The manga gives you this massive tonal whiplash. One moment, it's a silly manga filled with a lot of slapsticks, and in the same page, a group of goblins are talking about making this girl a slave. Let me just say the author is a huge fan of Goblin Slayer, because the manga has goblins who are notoriously evil. I understand that it's common in the majority of the media that we consume, but how about a character who's loved by the gods but refuses to let them roll the dice? I know individually it's not grounds for plagiarism, individually that is, but if you read Goblin Slayer, give this one a glance, it'll give you a small chuckle. I don't know about you, but I started to notice that every time they bring up the stat sheets or explain the main character's abilities, I sometimes just black out. Unlike your local psychic, I can predict what overplayed abilities it might have. Oh, he has spatial storage and the ability to appraise things. I know I made the joke about what profession they were gonna isekai next. Well, if you're keeping track, construction workers, that's who. Well, a construction worker ends up getting transported to another world and decides he's gonna build a beast folk village because why not? You know, it's a miracle when the authors in this genre give their protagonists a backstory, since a lot of them are just self-inserts. But I'll give credit where credit is due. Everything about our protagonist is neatly explained in a few pages. It doesn't feel like it's rushed or extremely vague. His parents were farmers, and when his dad wanted to get some money, he took an influencer course and got scammed, dying, and later the protagonist and his mother using the life insurance money to pay off all his debt. Then she follows soon after. Watching all of that, the protagonist learned and tried his hardest not to end up like his parents. Nice, simple, and to the point. But that's all that I personally like about our young hero. Well, after finally escaping working in a black company, he was suddenly summoned to another world as a hero. But like you would expect, he lacks any combat abilities, and instead has cultivating skills, where whatever he plants becomes a tree. He does use it creatively, like planting money and growing a money tree. Yeah, but it's kind of uninteresting. There's a lot that happens, yet none of it feels impactful, mainly because our main character is some kind of super genius, always planning 5 steps ahead. Okay, extremely cool concept. The main character can't level up, but the only way that he becomes stronger is by absorbing the corpse of his defeated enemies. So as long as it's dead, he can gain their strength and their skills. And, as you would expect, he lacks any ability to level up, so he's viewed as a failure and is kicked out of the kingdom in order to fend for himself. Well, the concept in my opinion is pretty amazing. Can you imagine? The main character is getting ambushed, and slowly throughout the fight he has to beat and eat his enemies until there's nobody left, having some kind of internal struggle to either become stronger or lose more of his humanity. That would be wild. But unfortunately, like these other isekais with some amazing concept, the way that it was executed as well, as you already know, done poorly. You could repeatedly drop a toddler and he'll still come out more intelligent than this manga. It has some interesting ideas, but the author lacks the ability to execute it properly. What if Tony Stark was a furry? Well, if he's anything like Daki over here, he'll go around the world saving beast folks in the hopes that they will one day join his harem. Our protagonist here ends up getting taken out mistakenly, and to make it right, the angel decides to give him another chance at life, so the angel gives him a floating castle with Iron Man-like golems. Dude reincarnates into a world with the ability to seduce anybody. And that's all you're getting out of me, because unlike these authors, I care if you're being entertained or not. I have never been one to criticize someone else's art style, since my skills is comparable with a toddler with Parkinson's. It's just everyone here looks like it's an experiment to see if people are able to recognize what people are. Like aside from the typical reincarnated in another world, the art style just looks like it's a bad imitation of somebody else's bad art style. I kinda find it funny how the previous isekai was so jarring to the eyes, and this one's absolutely beautiful, yet that's the only positive thing that I could say about it. That, and it doesn't follow the typical high school in another world that we're used to. We still get the same essence of mediocrity. You know, the typical I want to live in another world as a powerless individual, with the added twist that, oh, it's a fantasy. Have you ever read something, then immediately forgot you even read it? That would be the entirety of this manga. At first, I couldn't tell if I had read one too many bad isekais and it started affecting my prefrontal cortex, or maybe I was stuck in a time loop fighting Dormammu.
Okay, Jesus Christ, Dormammu, I've come to bargain. Why am I stuck in a time?
Was the story that forgettable? Well, aside from him not joining the guild, yeah, pretty much. Alright, they summon a new hero every few years to celebrate the peace between humans and demons. But the thing is, our protagonist isn't the hero. He was summoned with the other strangers, and now must wait a full year before they're able to send him home. That's if he wants to go home. Like I said before, it's a slice of life with a bit of wish fulfillment thrown in there. Have you ever wondered how society would be if it was ran by women? If men were subservient to big, strong, powerful women? Well, me neither, but I did find this manga about a guy trying to run an inn in a dungeon island with the same premise. But before I start, I just need to have a conversation with you, right? Come on, don't be shy. Sit down. We do this every other manga. Come on. Listen to me. There's a reason why this one's ranked number 69, if you catch my drift. You know, hint hint, wink wink, nudge nudge. It's a spicy manga light, alright? Now that I've alienated my last female viewer, I can proudly say, although I'm not a big fan of ecchi, I kinda enjoyed this one. One day, Sanada Shido ends up fishing a god, and for not turning him into sashimi, he was granted a wish to be able to create any items that he wanted. But unfortunately for him, his wish can only be granted in another world. So God summons a black hole and teleports him to a medieval world, where he almost immediately got assaulted. Wow, what a horrible situation to be in. While in prison, he meets his temporary love interest, Chris, and together they break out of prison, where they end up in the island that most of the story takes place in, where our protagonist learns that men can't use magic and every woman there is also physically superior to men. So they go to war, while the dudes become a stay-at-home wife. And well, it's the Middle Ages. You've seen enough to Jinshi, you goddamn degenerate. The story isn't an action-adventure, you mostly follow the main character trying to build an inn on top of a hill, and he comes to, no pun intended, pirates and some monsters. Let's be honest, you're not here for that. You are here because the main character is a dude from our world living over there. so you can imagine the situations that he'd be getting into. And that is all I will say. Oh, I almost forgot, bonus, there's no elf girls. Alright, I'll be the brave one in the room and say something controversial. If you're looking to get laid, I highly suggest you read this manga. Listen, I only had to read one chapter and the next thing I know I'm cuddling next to Big Tyrone. If that's not a big indicator to the manga that you won't read, then I don't know what to say. Well, the manga begins with a protagonist finally going home after defeating the Demon Lord. And it's cool and all, but why? Why in every isekai the protagonist is so desperate to go home? I understand if they throw a throwaway line that, oh, there's someone that he's waiting to go home with, but no, nothing. In every isekai that has a protagonist that wants to go home, it's never explored why. Aside from the authors fearing that little Satoshi won't be able to relate to the main character in his dream of building a harem. But I guess that's what makes the self-inserted thing, since the only thing that he wants to do is go home and play video games. Well, allow me to present to you EDP's wet dream of a manga. Our main character is a cool and silent type because he says so. He never voices his own opinion even though it lands him in hot water. Well, here's the fun part. Stay with me. He ends up defeating the Demon Lord and was sent home, except he didn't go home. Instead, I shit you not, he was sent to a world filled with nothing but 10-year-old girls. I've done it! I found the most booty-breaking manga out there. One read, one watch, one save, and your cave will be caved in. Oh, also, it's a world where they fight with mechas. I thought I should add that in. Okay, if you've never read or watched anime from the early 20th centuries, this is a prime example of one. Instead, the hero returns to the real world. This concept has been done a couple of times before, except he doesn't return to his mundane life. Instead, he returns to a supernatural version of Earth with demon hunters and exorcists, which ironically makes him fit better than when he was a regular Joe. It's interesting, I find it somewhat interesting, but this manga is really a relic. There's far too many tropes from the early 2000s that even back then were jarring to sit through. Like how every female in that world is a professional kickboxer. Or how about the transfer student who's half Japanese, half Russian, half Somalian, and half alien? Don't forget, that also happens to be a secret agent. And I can't finish this part without adding the legal loli, that also happens to be the main character's mom, who loves him a little bit too much if you ask me. If the characters were decently written, I would have suggested taking a look at it, since it is a bit charming, but it's just one cliche after another. I have never seen the main character so desperate to become a slave. This man is always risking his freedom by constantly getting into dumb situations. Let me give you an example. He meets a slave that he wants to save and that's all good and all, but when he hears the terms of buying her, where if you can't pay $120 million to buy her, then you will be sold into slavery instead. Tell me, does that not sound being down horrendously? He's willing to throw away his freedom for no other reason than he wants to clap slave cheeks. Okay, let's start positive with the things that I like about this manga. I like the cover art, it looks nice. Alright, now that I got that out the way, I don't recommend that you take a look at it. Listen, I'm here because I value your time. I mean, not enough for you not to sit down and hear me complain for an hour, but enough that you won't waste your time reading this garbage. Alright, onto the manga. It's the same generic isekai that we've seen a dozen times before. The first few chapters were somewhat enjoyable, but it becomes more difficult to sit through, since it just repeats the same plot points again and again. It would be nice seeing him scavenge for items if it wasn't for the main character being so goddamn boring. Do you know what's the biggest issue that I have with the isekai genre? It's that convenient things just fall onto the main character's laps. Let me explain. Whenever the main character is facing some sort of obstacle, there's never a scene of tension like, wow, he might lose. I understand his life not being in danger. After all, he's the main character. Without him, you wouldn't get much of a story. But everything plays out so perfectly, making the manga feel like there's no stakes to anything that he does. Take the very first fight the main character gets into. He just jumps into a battle with an overwhelming army of summons, and when he ends up losing the upper hand, instead of facing a challenge with a bit more thought into it, he just summons a life-leeching slug that was just conveniently in his inventory. And I thought it was going to be like that the entirety of the manga. It kinda was, since most battles of the main character summoning a larger amount of monsters at the enemy until they stop breathing. In any other manga, this would become tedious to read, yet for the 20-something chapters that I read, it was somewhat pleasantly entertaining. I don't know if the bar was set low from reading a whole bunch of dog water isekais, but it reminds me of a weaker version of Death Mage. Aside from that, there's not much to it. He's reborn as a serf, works his way up to commoner, and then becomes a servant for a lord. And anything else would be an arbitrary spoiler that goes above the 10 chapter rule. The thing is, I don't hate this manga. I thought it could be something great if only it had a better power system, like the title suggested. Okay, hear me out. Wouldn't it be hilarious if one day the dude dies and is reincarnated into another world, specifically a demi-human world? Instead of feeling awe and inspired at the world presented to him, he would turn out to be some kind of demi-human racist, and now must live in a world that's only filled with monsters? I don't know, seems demented but in a fun way. The ideas presented here are not that bad, it just doesn't flow well. Since the author skipped a few chapters trying to make our main character look like he's some super cool general that fights for the poor or oppressed demi-humans, the story begins with our main character 3 years later leading the demi-humans in the battle against, well, humans. Again, cool concept, but it's just so poorly executed. Well, after losing the first battle, the manga just turns into a harem manga, where he deflowers a dark elf. That's pretty much it. I understand the concept of revenge. Watching a main character to get brutally tossed aside by the people who summon him to one day either save the kingdom or lead to its eventual downfall is extremely captivating, when it's done right. And Nito started off fantastically. A bully boy eventually gets tired of being the victim, so one day he decides to climb to the top of his school roof and jump, waking up in another world with the same classmates that bully him. So even after death, he wasn't able to escape his classmates' torture. Well, as any revenge story begins, he comes back as a healer, the so-called useless class, and is transported inside of a dungeon to die. But as you would expect, he becomes a typical edge loner in another world, seeking nothing but revenge, that must now traverse the kingdom, building a multiracial harem, with the goal of one day getting his revenge. Cool premise, but everything just disappoints. It's formulaic at this point. If you've seen one bad revenge manga, you've seen them all. I keep hearing people praise this isekai to the high heavens for how it's not like every other isekai out there. And if you like that, that's fine and all, but it's like every other isekai out there. It follows the same formulaic plot points. He dies, meets a goddess, buys a slave, and the only thing that sets it apart is the art. I don't know how to describe it, but I'll try. The art looks like a cartoon. Every panel has a main character doing something goofy. There's always something going on, so it doesn't let you take a second to breathe. Which is ironic because you're reading a manga. You control the pace of how fast you're reading. You know, at this point, I've read so many bad isekais, I feel like I could start calling out which ones might be good or bad in the first 5 pages. Like a bad superpower. Instead of saving the world, I'm here saving your time. The main character here is a certified genius because he was just summoned to a new world, with skills and abilities that he's never seen or used before. But he's able to activate a skill that lets him hide his status against a tool that's specifically designed to see it. What in the world is that writing? But whatever. Later that night, he breaks into the castle armory, where he steals a fancy new set of clothing and a dagger and goes to murder the king, and the only reason he doesn't follow through with it was because he doesn't know all their plans yet. 10 out of 10, I would not read again. Yeah, it was kind of interesting. It reminded me of Interspecies Reviewer, with the guy going around enjoying brothels. But that's where the similarities begin and end. And it just kind of died off not long after. So basically the main character dies and ends up getting isekai'd with the cheat ability that allows him to create potions, and instead of going in these dangerous adventures, he uses his cheat ability to make money and visit brothels. It has some cool looking fighting scenes. That's about it. They just look nice. I wish the story would get the same kind of treatment the art gets. To be honest, if you're planning on picking this up, I'd suggest you just read some spicy manga instead. Mind you, the fight scenes were well drawn, and they're meant to be viewed comedically, but it doesn't do it well or say anything clever. It's just a waste of time. Not many people know this about me, but my favorite pastime is practicing my backstrokes in the intellectual sewage that's known as the isekai genre. Alright, I can physically acknowledge that the stuff that I like or watch for entertainment is downright horrendous at times. I would rather buy a fursuit than to ever support this. Okay, I am exaggerating a little bit. I would prefer burning the money before doing any of these two. But you get what I mean, right? A high school demon creates the largest dungeon and somehow manages to avoid getting cancelled since 2018. You know, the more I think about it, who would get blamed if a piece of your school just vanished? Imagine it from the perspective of people living in Japan. Half the school is gone. Do they think that students ended up getting raptured, or do you blame it on the North Korea weapon? Like, I'm imagining people forming conspiracy theories, thinking it's like a new American weapon. The thought of that is so silly. I would love to read an isekai where we focus on the people back on Earth and how they deal with people just vanishing. So it's a revenge against the kingdom type of manga. And yeah, I know I say it a lot, but cool premise but bad execution. He's stranded in the middle of a forest where he's nearly eaten alive until a group of undead appear out of nowhere and save him. And that right there is the good stuff. That's the creme de la creme. And I would love to see an isekai where the main character has to survive in a forest filled with these overpowered creatures trying to hunt him down. But like all good things, it must eventually all come to an end. He's saved by his new undead friends before doing what every bad isekai does. Overpowered protagonist, boobs, guild, trifecta. You've heard it all before. You don't need me to explain every single little detail. Calling this a cliche harem isekai would be complimenting this work of art. Usually I would try to come up with some sort of theme that somewhat relates to the story that they're trying to tell, but in the 70-something isekais that I've gone through, I physically cannot will myself to write something like this. It doesn't even deserve that. You know what? It's extremely rare for me to feel like this, but for once I feel like I've wasted 20 minutes of my damn life. Because I sat down and had to read this. I never shame anyone for liking bad manga. We all have that one or two that's not viewed favorably, right? But I will make an exception for this one. If this is your favorite guilty pleasure, I will shame you. Yes, you. You are a bad person for liking this. You should feel bad. No, you should feel worse than that. You should feel ashamed. My guy, go look into therapy because I know you are fighting some demons. You can call me Nostradamus because I can say this with 100% certainty. This will get an anime adaptation. Maybe in the late 2023 or early 2024. Not because it's so good that it will become the next Mushoku Tensei, but because it perfectly balances the right amount of mediocrity. In this world, the eye colors that you're born with reflect how powerful a mage you will become. Red being considered one of the most powerful eyes since it can use all types of magic. Well, the main character decides that he feels lonely being at the top, so he creates a second body that will wake up 200 years into the future. If any of that made sense, imagine how I feel. I had to reread it and make sense of it all. But yeah, the story starts because he was tired of people cowering in fear because of his red eyes. Well, now 200 years later, red eyes are being viewed as a joke. So our main character embarks in this painfully generic journey to prove that red eyes are not a joke, they're actually amazing. You know what, I'm calling it right now. This will get an anime, and it will be the second most awful anime to air. Don't think I forgot about you, Boruto. Okay, stay with me. The main character and his childhood friend ended up getting whisked away to a Lovecraftian world filled with nothing but killer tentacles. Hey, are you still with me? Because the main character ends up getting devoured by a monster, and is later reincarnated into a body of a tentacle. There are other stuff that happens, but none of that matters because I can't show you anything. The title alone already lets you know what you're getting into. I've been dying to say this line ever since Fantasy Bishoujo Oji-san, an anime that came out last summer. Alright, here it is. Is it gay to clap your homie's cheeks, even if he was turned into a girl? I scrapped the video, but goddamn, I was not gonna let that joke die. The manga is just a video game version of Oji-san. The main character gets turned into a girl, so his best friend and the main character embark on the journey to find a way home, while fighting the urge to not catch feelings. I sat down to read 10 chapters of a bad isekai, and unfortunately I stayed for 31 chapters about a boy growing up to be an exceptional leader. I wasn't expecting this one to be so entertaining, mainly because I'm not a fan of the whole main character coming back as a toddler, since they have the personality of a wet cum rag. Because again, they're children, what are they gonna do? When was the last time you heard of an infant defeating a dragon? And the other thing is, how every main character that ends up getting reincarnated with the ability to appraise things almost never actually uses it correctly. At the top of my head I can't remember the name of it, but there was an isekai where the protagonist had the ability to appraise things, and he used it to learn languages, fly, and use fire magic, but whatever. But here it feels natural. He's not some overpowered toddler that could survive an attack from a dragon. He's just a kid with the mind of an adult. So instead, he uses his ability to find gifted individuals to form his own militia. I'm not gonna lie to you, it's a little bit slow, but it's a good series nonetheless. And I'm positive that's something that the author was going for, since we follow him going from a toddler to a teenager in 30-something chapters. It kinda resembles Mushoku Tensei in that sort of way, but unfortunately the thing that brings it down is the main character. He can get a little bit frustrating to follow. He has the same problems that most main characters have in this genre, and that's that he doesn't show much initiative, and has the personality of a wet blanket. Outside of that, everything is quite nice, from the supporting character to its art. It still does have those generic isekai moments, but I wasn't expecting it to be this good. There's nothing wrong with wish fulfillment media. One of my favorite animes is No Game No Life, an anime that rolls in pure escapism. But No Game No Life has something that most isekais, including this one, lack: a likable and complex character. The only reason it's fascinating watching Sora play a game of chess that you know he's gonna win is because he will go and do something unexpected, like introducing the concept of NTR into that world. Yet here is what you would expect. A fat loser that's always getting bullied enters mom's closet and ends up in another world where he defeats a level 99 trillion dragon and levels up to the max. And when he wakes up, he goes from a 4-foot dude into a K-pop star. And instantly all the girls fall for him, the dudes respect him, and the enemies go down in one punch. And of course, like you would expect, our hero is a totally selfless, noble soul that forgives him. Even his cruel sibling starts liking him. If you're here for a deep story with character development and a likable main character, then I don't know what to tell you. Okay, it's embarrassing to say this, but it finally hit me. Even the most generic stories can become something amazing depending on who ends up in that world. For example, take Sid from Eminence in the Shadow. The world is as plain and as simple as you can get. It's elevated because the main character behaves in such a bizarre way, always trying to blend into his surroundings, but then has a secret identity where he does some of the most edgiest things known to mankind. And that just makes you want to sit down and watch more. Which brings me to my next point. When I start reading an isekai where the main character is a meek, nice guy who's always embarrassed to talk to the opposite gender, I know it's going to be one of those type of stories. Either wish fulfillment or power fantasy. And well, this one falls for the latter. The story is where the main character ends up in another world as a healer, where he spends 10 chapters either training his body or his healing magic. And mind you, there's nothing wrong with a training arc. But god, it's just so forgettable. He goes outside to train and then goes into his room to practice healing magic. Imagine that for 10 chapters. I have never once viewed myself as a YouTuber who recommends manga, and I know that sounds confusing. Most of the stuff that I like to talk about is either anime or manga related. But you're severely misunderstanding me. I am a merchant of degeneracy that masquerades as a reputable source of quality content, and I am here to show you what peak degeneracy looks like. The manga takes place in the fantasy world, I know, big shocker, with the standard transportation and magic system that I mentioned a million times before, with a unique twist. The manga knows you're here for the milkers and the big personalities, and it uses it to its advantage. How many times have you read a manga where the semen receptacle called a love interest shows great interest in our protagonist, only to be turned away because he's afraid that if he touches her, he might catch cooties? Well, Neat, I'm not pronouncing that name, takes all the familiar tropes that we're used to seeing, but makes it enjoyable. The story follows Masuru, a dude who went for a job interview and instead was sent to another world, where that world will disappear in 20 years. Why will it disappear? I don't know. God never stated why. So he chooses to live his life by the fullest by building a harem, fighting monsters, and partaking in the devil's tango. Nothing that you haven't seen before, but something about it makes it so entertaining to read. I don't know if it's the situations that these characters be getting into, but something about the manga consistently gets a laugh out of me. I pay taxes. Sometimes. So I'm old enough to tell you that my brain has matured and evolved past the need to indulge in such forms of entertainment. But the main character feels like he's a real guy that was just plopped into another world. He knows what he's looking for and that he actively pursues it. Unlike the waste of inks that plague this genre. I said my piece and I don't want to elongate this video more than I have to. I love this manga and I wish more authors would take inspiration from these type of works, but you know, one can only dream. I have never been clickbaited so hard in my entire life, and mind you, I was lurking on the internet when rickrolling someone was considered quote unquote cool. It was known as mental torture to the highest degree, but even those war crimes pale in comparison to this. I want you to take a second and look at the cover. The main character looks so cool and composed and dignified sitting next to his potential love interest. And you're thinking, wow, I'm gonna get a realistic take on military battles that have some magic to them. And then you read the first few chapters, and all that expectation gets flushed down the toilet. Don't get me wrong, it's a fine manga, it's just not what I expected or even wanted. And to be fully honest with you, I don't plan on continuing this after I'm done with the video. Mainly because the main character panics a bit too much, even in moments when it's not needed. I know it's made for like comedic purposes, but it doesn't land. Why a toddler? I genuinely want answers to these questions. Why is she a 3-year-old that can already study and do magic? Do you know what real 3-year-olds do? I don't. I'm not EDP. But if I have to make an educated guess, then most likely just poop and get the little grubby hands on anything that costs a lot of money. Sometimes both. Well, it's not like this manga was going for realism either. Since the father decides, you know it would be a great father-daughter bonding activity? If I bring my toddler into a forest filled with dangerous creatures in order to meet a dragon that might give her some knowledge. Makes sense in my book. To me it all sounds goofy, but maybe I'm not the target demographic. It's a shoujo slice of life, so it's not my cup of tea. But if a toddler playing with animals sounds fun to you, well, everybody has their thing. I was reincarnated with an overpowered ability, so I'll beat them up my way as an action adventure. Oh my god. Please forgive my Lana Rose imitation. I just read so many bad isekais that my body just started to physically react to the words on the page. Just reading the title alone has me convulsing on the ground. Grandpappy, is that you? Yes, me boy, hurry up and finish the video. Alright, I'll keep it brief. Our selfless hero tries protecting someone by getting in between them and a gigantic ball of fire. Spoiler, they both died. So God revived them with the overpowered ability that reflects all power. So basically Meliodas in another world, and look, his love interest could barely count to 10 as well. I understand being inspired by someone else's work in order to create something new that also feels familiar for the readers, but has its own little unique charm to it. But I feel like this author was a little bit too inspired, if you catch my drift. We have a protagonist that knows all about the world that they live in because he was forced to play it by his little sister. So he uses the in-game knowledge to exploit that world in order to become overpowered. And it might be a possibility, but the main character's little sister might also be in that world, creating most of the conflicts that the main character has to face. But thankfully, that's all the plot points that are borrowed. I want to say the villainess is trying to be a more grounded version of Mob's life. While Mob was more focused on telling jokes, a villainous protagonist is more goal-driven, since he's there trying to prevent some in-game calamity. If you like Mob, you might enjoy this, emphasis on the might. Again, Mob was more focused on telling jokes, and were so creative that not in a million years would I be excited to watch a high schooler hit on his classmate's mom. But somehow they did it and it works. You know, in theory, a reverse isekai could be one of the most interesting ideas depending on how chaotic the author makes the setting. You're not gonna sit there and tell me that you wouldn't want to see a tank fight an Earth Dragon or something like that, or have civilians trying to avoid clashing against a fantasy knight. That would be an interesting idea, but the story presented to us is a bit different. Instead of our protagonist receiving an overpowered ability and a one-way ticket to a fantasy world, our protagonist has the fantasy world come to him. After working on his farm, a knight from another world begs if she could stay the night. Not what I expected, it's a slice of life manga where the knight slowly has to integrate into our world. And after thinking about it, most of the story focuses around our protagonist helping another blonde foreigner live in another country. Did it really have to be an isekai? At this point, I'm starting to believe that the only reason that this story was made an isekai is because the author will quickly run out of ideas. It's okay, but it has some of the same issues that most generic isekais have, and that's for some reason the only character trait that they give these protagonists is that he's just a nice guy. And in the process, making the story that they're trying to tell so boring. Editing Angel over here, hey, fun little fact, but do you know there's two identical stories about a fantasy knight coming over to our world to live with a farmer? And do you know both of them are still garbage? I can't believe this author made Psychosis look so adorable. Imagine having a voice in your head all day telling you what to do, but instead of telling you to dig a ditch, it gives you an 8-year time limit to improve your skills, or one of your wet nurses is going to remove you and your mother from this world. That sounds cool. It's a race against the clock to develop your skills before you're assassinated. In theory, it has the building blocks to be a great series. But in practice, it's there. Not good, not bad, just average. I held on to some belief that after he managed to escape the professional assassin, he would have to face some challenges in the forest. But almost immediately he's given a pet wolf in another home, conveniently placed behind a waterfall, so just in case anyone did show up, it would be hidden, which is really disappointing. Instead of becoming a story about a boy growing up shunned and hunted down by society itself, it becomes a story that we've seen 1,000 times before. Alright, everybody knows that the moment the main character is revealed to be a guy, there's always a half-naked goddess throwing herself at the main character. But I started to notice that 90% of all female isekai fall under one of two camps. They are either reincarnated as some kind of punching bag or some sort of animal. Why? The last thing I would ever want to come back is as a penguin, let alone a magical penguin, which I kinda find funny. How come a majority of female-centric isekai fall into these two camps? Either hated by everyone including their own parents, or the other option is to come back as a furry. Well, yeah, the manga follows the daily life of our protagonist reincarnated as a fox spirit, with an overbearing mother. Also, I feel like I should add this, but it's one of those stories that didn't benefit from it being an isekai, since it doesn't play any importance to the story. She maybe mentions it once in a throwaway line that she's from another world. The protagonist could have honestly been a fox spirit with a weird quirk, and I suspect the only reason it has isekai in the title was just to sell a few more copies. But yeah, very wholesome and adorable slice of life. Slice of life has to be one of the trickiest genres to balance. If you take it too slow, it becomes NyQuil. If you put too much, then it just becomes a different genre. And unfortunately, it is just too slow. Like really slow. And that's such a shame because this manga contains likable characters. A main character that not only has a brain, but could stop and think of smart ways to use his ability, with the added caveat that he also has a personality. I think it was maybe 20 something isekais ago that I saw a character with personality. Still, I'll keep this part brief and just say that the main character loves to build structures. Eventually, he ended up building a monument in the game that was so popular that other players started making a tradition to propose there. Well, one day an admin decided to bring him into that video game, in order to build as much as he wants. Outside of the builder class being considered a useless class, it's kinda refreshing, watching him use it creatively. The story follows our main character who ends up reincarnated into a frontier land, isolated from the rest of the world, and as time goes on he gradually develops his newfound water abilities, slowly opening up and beginning to interact with others, and exploring the world around him. It's a slow-paced slice of life with some elements of action and adventure. It's not that bad, except if you blink you most likely will miss a lot, since the manga moves at a breakneck speed. It's It's understandable to have pride in one's cuisine. Everybody believes that their country's home cooked can taste the best. And I mean, kinda, to a certain extent. After all, it's a food that one consumes in the formative years, so yeah, there's a bit of biasy there. But there's something about reading or watching anything that loves praising soy sauce that I just find tiring at this point. I'll be honest, to me, soy sauce is just black sea water. And all the times that I've ever eaten sushi, only once have I ever used it. Just to be clear, I'm not trying to flex, it's just that it's not that great. In my opinion. Oh boy, I can't wait to find that one comment by a Japanophile correcting me on Japanese taste buds. Angel's Error? You're wrong. You see, soy sauce can only be enjoyed by those who develop umami taste bud.
Shut the fuck up.
Oh yeah, but getting back on topic, aside from waking up in another world, the story is just all over the place. It's like it doesn't know what topic it should be focusing on. Whether on the cooking or the rush conflict that the main character gets into. And another thing, this feels like a more cartoonish version of the Isekai I'm not going to pronounce the name of. But Isekai Ryouridou is more grounded in reality. You have two main characters coming from a culinary background and appearing in another world, compared to the protagonist here, who just appears in another world and starts living their life there. Just why does every protagonist who dies immediately forget about their families back home? Like, imagine spending 15 years raising this bastard, and you leave them alone for a minute, and when you come back he's already moved on, started a family, and forgot about you. That kind of writing just takes me out of the whole experience, which is such a shame because the art is drop dead gorgeous and fun to look at. There's something special about viewing the story from the perspective of a villain, since it's a point of view that we almost never get to see. And not to sound like a psychopath, but it's always nice seeing what led them to be called a villain. I find that so captivating. Maybe the idea of watching a man set a family of 4 on fire because they cut him off in traffic is a little bit extreme or distasteful. And the only thing I can say about that is make your own goddamn video. It sounds good, and it has been done before. If I remember correctly, Overlord was the first isekai anime to feature a normal guy transported to another world, and gradually becoming a villain throughout the series. But unlike Overlord, Her Majesty's Swarm suffers from a multitude of problems. Some of them in the writing department. Okay, all of them in the writing. Take the world that the story takes place in. If you have ever read any fantasy book out there, then you already have an idea what the world is like. If the characters were well written, then it wouldn't be much of an issue, since you're there to witness their journey. But everyone there is so cartoonishly one dimension that it becomes silly, especially when it comes down to our villains. Everybody that our protagonists eventually fight is so over the top evil that it just takes the fun out of reading it. How do you make everyone she's gonna fight evil? But whatever, I wanted to like this one. I love the cover. Like I said, villains are infinitely more entertaining to watch than the typical hero, but it lacks so much depth to it that it makes it disappointing. Because I care about you, I just have to add one more. You know what? Let me give you a proper send-off and poetically tie everything up in a neat bow. But do you remember the first manga in the video? Hey, editing angel over here real quick. Scratch that. I moved a couple of them around, so maybe it's like the 4th one. It's the one with the other guy, Isekai. He's trying to find his going away buddy. Well, have you ever heard about Love After World Domination, Slave of Magic, and Nakagami Got Killed? And that's all of them were made by the same person. I don't want to spoil too much of it, since it's a quite fun and goofy read. But dude got Isekai, ending up in prison in another world, and he gets his power in a unique way. Listen, if you like Akagami Got Killed with some adult content, then I'll leave it at that. Okay, that last one was truly it. We went on this marvelous journey of self-discovery and love, and a lot of regret, and I mean a lot of regret. Just to answer one simple question, how many isekais can you read before becoming crazy? But instead of finding answers to that question, I was left baffled with the insane amount of sheer, refreshing, high-quality dog water that plagues this genre. So instead of focusing on the negative, I just want to take this time to highlight some of the mangas that I found exceptional, or have like potential to become something great. Just in case some people didn't get it, because I can be a wee bit negative when it comes to talking about manga. And it's not like I despise the ones that I talk about, except for maybe like 1 or 2. And you know who you are. Most of them are average or boring, and it's finally nice to be done with this video. I lied, it wasn't 2 weeks, it was more like I've been obsessing over this video for the last 2 months of my life. Because here's the funny part, right? I fucking deleted my script twice, and my laptop committed Sudoku. That's why some of these isekais already have an anime that came out and finished. All while I was home fighting my demons. You know, I'm tired, I just want to go to sleep now. Subscribe, I've been God's fair mistake, and I'll see you in a 1000 isekai video. No.